Imagine if you were involved in Bitcoin in 2014. That's essentially the stage that we're at. I think what Michael Saylor is doing at MicroStrategy is absolutely genius. First of all, he's insane. Let's acknowledge that. And I mean that as a compliment. He's created a vehicle where fixed income investment funds now can create exposure to Bitcoin. And that's incredibly important because, the fixed income market is $150 trillion. Bittensor is very unique in that the staking yield is monetizable. So long story short, the vehicle that I created looks very much like a real estate investment. You have partners, you have an ownership structure, and we pool it into an investment vehicle. So my role in this ecosystem is more investor education. It's getting people involved who otherwise wouldn't be involved, to really make this digestible for people who aren't necessarily familiar with the crypto ecosystem. Will it intuitively make sense to somebody who doesn't have an investing skill set or a machine learning skill set?
Welcome to the Ventura Labs podcast, where we dive into the world of Bittensor and explore the latest developments and innovations. Today, we are joined by Michael White, a seasoned executive with a wealth of experience in traditional finance. We'll delve into his journey from his pioneering Bittensor Fund, which brought traditional investors into the crypto space, and his investment thesis, to redefining the way we think about intelligence and work, extrapolating the implications of Bittensor's decentralized approach on the future of work and society. And now, to Michael with the 10th Ventura Labs podcast. When did you first discover Bittensor, and how has your background in traditional finance, Wall Street, real estate influenced your approach to Bittensor?
Yeah, so I first discovered Bittensor in the fall of 2022. We had just moved to Texas, me and my family from Brooklyn. We had been up there about 15 years and, had gotten involved in the Bitcoin ecosystem in 2019 just as an investor. I was following this guy named Matt Hamilton on Twitter. Matt Hamilton was a developer at Ripple for several years, was just tracking what he was up to professionally, and he left. And all of a sudden on his Twitter bio one day, I saw that he was starting at DevRel at OpenTensor Foundation. So I knew that he was a fan of being in organizations that were doing good work. And, I looked into what OpenTensor was and went to their website, bittensor.com, and started reading through the white paper. And then just immediately it kind of clicked, right? It's the Bitcoin of AI, open source, permissionless, everything that you want to see, no ICO, no VC involvement, all organic growth. So I started following it, and then within, the way it works with me, which is I think the way it works with most people, is that if you have skin in the game, you really track it closely. If you don't have skin in the game, you don't follow it as tightly. So I bought a little bit, and then kept researching it more and more and more. And then the more I researched, the more I liked it. The more I liked it, the more I bought it. The more I bought it, the more I researched. And then the cycle just went round and round. And it was awesome. Back it was like the Wild West back then. You had the exchange that was just a simple website, and you were manually sending Bitcoin to an address, and they you just kind of crossed your fingers and hoped that they would send you back Bittensor dTAO. And from there, it's just been really fun to watch it grow. It's obviously moved from this kind of budding ecosystem to really a very large, impressive ecosystem. Yesterday, you had the news that Barry Silbert, the CEO of Digital Currency Group, is who's like the oest of the OGs in the institutional space regarding Bitcoin, now is just all in the Bittensor ecosystem and devoting his time essentially fully to it. So it's been fun to be involved, been fun to watch it grow. I was briefly a validator for probably 6 months, and then as soon as you could delegate stake, we shut that down just because I forget the name of our validator. I think we were Texas Housed or something like that. But we weren't really contributing value to the ecosystem as much as some of the other larger validators like Mog and some of the others. So felt like the right thing to do was to shut that down and just invest in other people's in other people's work.
Yeah, that's great. 2022 is pretty early for Bittensor. You
Yeah,
also have experience as a pastor. How has
yeah.
that influenced your perspective on technology and society, like intertwining?
Yeah, I'd like to think that experience, impacts from a moral perspective what I invest in. I hope it does. I think it does. What I mean by that is I want to invest in ecosystems where the investment is honest, where I feel like what I'm investing in is actually going to have an impact. I think Bittensor is kind of a shining example of that. All throughout the crypto space, you have pump and dumps. You have people with selfish motives. You have people with hidden motives, ulterior motives. So I like to invest in protocols and ecosystems where all the cards are on the table, where you know exactly what you're getting into. You know, I think for me with Bittensor, the tokenomics are obviously the same as Bitcoin, but the major difference is you know who created it. Kind of the genesis of it. You can track it from start to finish, in a very linear fashion, and know who's been involved at every point in time. And that to me is a benefit when it comes to transparency. But at the end of the day, I want to invest in technology that's open, that's accessible. I have a disdain for OpenAI, for Sam Altman, as I know a lot of people in this community do, because there's nothing open about it. I think, as someone who comes from a nonprofit background, I think this kind of bait and switch maneuver where they started as a nonprofit and then basically just kind of finagled their way into a capped for profit within a nonprofit with Microsoft as a majority shareholder is just insane. It makes a mockery of nonprofit law in the United States, and there's just no. It's completely morally indefensible, for lack of a better way to put it. And I know that Sam Altman does what he has to do in terms of trying to convince people that it's still a good organization. But you see kind of top talent leaving. So I want to invest in the opposite of that, and Bittensor seems like the pretty natural, logical place for funds to be allocated. That's important for me. I would call the trendy term in the investment world is to be an impact investor. That can mean different things to different people. I know people in the real estate world where to be an impact investor just means you have low flow toilets in your properties. So that's not really the extent of what we're looking to do. That doesn't really help anybody. But to me, being an impact investor means investing in protocols that you believe in, that have potential to change the world, and also give democratic access, open access to that technology. I'm a huge fan of open sourcing technology, and I think Bittensor and the Open Tensor Foundation are leading the way in that. We do a lot of work at my day job. We do a lot of work in the construction space and the real estate investing space, and we have partnerships in the 3D concrete printing space with different academic institutions. Any partnership that we have, part of the agreement is that anything that we find, any IP that's developed, has to be open source. Just because that's the way that you proliferate a new technology and allow it to flourish and grow. So to find, late 2022, to find this ecosystem, to find this technology that kind of already checked all the boxes that I typically look for in the investment space was just awesome. It made it very easy to start investing and investing heavily.
And you're CEO of an investment fund that you said all the IP for the anything you invest in must be open source.
Mm-hmm.
That fits perfectly into Bittensor.
Mm-hmm.
So, what is your official investment thesis for Bittensor?
Yeah, I don't. I appreciate the way that you stated that, but I don't want to glorify what I do in the ecosystem, which realistically is very little. The way that I add value to the ecosystem is, and when I say very little, I mean that from a technical perspective. The way I'm a technical person, but I have a day job. There's only so much time I can give. But the way I add value to the ecosystem is by bringing in investors who, without a vehicle creation would not not be able to, or as of a year and a half ago would not be able to, but now would not be necessarily interested in investing in this space. So what that looks like for me is I started a fund. There were a bunch of people that I knew. I spent 15 years in New York before moving to Dallas 2 years ago. There were a bunch of people I knew in New York who all kind of had the same stance when it came to crypto, which is I don't really follow it. I don't really know what I'm doing, but if you see something that you like, let me know. And so when I started buying Bittensor at the second, third, and fourth quarters of 2022, I let them all know. They were all immediately interested. I think just seeing me excited about it got them excited about it, and they said, "Hey, let us know what you want to do." At that point in time, there wasn't really anything to do, but I kind of coached them through the mechanics of how to buy some and how to hold it. And back then it was very rudimentary, but over time, as the ecosystem started to grow and to develop, and now you have delegated staking, you stop a random person on the street and you say, "Hey, you delegate your stake," they're going to look at you like you have three heads. Like, what do you mean my stake? Like, they're going to have no idea what you're talking about. So one thing I think that is extremely important in the crypto space is that we create vehicles that allow investment dollars to come into this space from people who, without your help, without that vehicle, would not be interested or would be shut out from the space. So it comes back to having efficient capital markets, so that capital can be allocated, so that it's rewarding people who are actually building stuff that's useful. That's the way you want in any capital market. You want maximum transparency. You want every barrier that you can remove to be removed, because that helps efficient capital allocation. So what that looks like for me, right now, full time, what I do is commercial real estate, and most of the guys who I brought into this space as investors are real estate investors. So there are several things they want to see. They don't want to deal with buying, selling on an exchange, and now you got to go through MEXC, and then to off ramp you got to go through KuCoin, or all these like weird motions where you're running a VPN because, oh no, I'm in New York and I can't, like, none of that is on the table for them. They just lose interest very quickly, and it sounds sketchy because it is sketchy. And then so what that looks like, they want ease of use, they want transparency, they want to be able to make a simple cash payment, get simple cash payments in return. They want to yield, which is one of the things that I think makes Bittensor extremely unique and very attractive from an investment standpoint. If I'm investing in a commercial real estate property, I'm going in, I have my cost basis, but I know I'm getting monthly checks, rent checks, which to me is a cash yield. I think Bittensor is very unique in that the staking yield is monetizable. So long story short, the vehicle that I created looks very much, it's a simple LLC, looks very much like a real estate investment. You have partners, you have an ownership structure, and then you take, in this case I wanted to avoid taking cash and purchasing the Bittensor, just because I there's not clear regulation at this point when it comes to exactly how that transaction is going to be treated. The last thing I want to do with a wife and 4 kids is end up in prison for 10 years because I didn't check a box and I was lazy or moving too quickly. But everybody buys TAO on their own, and we pool it into an investment vehicle, and then I'm the manager of that investment vehicle. So I have at this point a series of pooled wallets where backed up. Anybody in this space, by the way, just as a disclaimer, anybody in this space who is not using a cold wallet, you need to get serious about that. I know a lot of people, like, you've been involved in this since 2022, and you've just always used the same seed phrase, like, you got to get yourself a wallet that can be backed up with a ledger, that can be backed up, air gapped with the Polkadot vault, some sort of cold wallet solution. Anyway, so we pool all the funds, and then I manage them. So that means I delegate the stake now. Really it's more preemptive, because in the next 6 months or whenever the timing is going to be, we're going to have dTAO rolling out, and then I think we're off to the races. It's going to be like a Bittensor casino, if you want to term it that way. It's going to, and I think that's ultimately why Barry Silbert is interested in the space, is because he sees that the Bittensor network is really going to be a VC marketplace. So if you come to the network and you bring a certain wallet size, you own a certain amount of Bittensor, that's funding that now you can make available to startups, people who are building subnets, who are now network participants. And again, capital allocation, you see a subnet that you like through dynamic TAO, you'll be able to invest in that enterprise directly, and there will be a return associated with that investment. So you'll be, it's efficient. It's everything an investor needs to be. You're going to put in your money, you're going to see them grow the company, you're going to have a capital return associated with that investment. And at the end of the day, in theory, you roll it back into Bittensor and the network continues to grow. And then as the network grows, your holdings grow. And at that point, I don't know if this becomes a full-time job and, the rest of the things that I'm doing kind of slide under the table, but we'll see what happens. I'm excited about it. I'm here for it. So my role in this ecosystem is more investor education. It's getting people involved who otherwise wouldn't be involved. It's opening people's eyes to the need to really make this digestible for people who aren't necessarily familiar with the crypto ecosystem, who aren't machine learning engineers. You can get in the weeds, and I have been in the weeds, but at the end of the day, what matters most to me is if I tell somebody who's not familiar with crypto, not familiar with AI, if I talk to somebody about Bittensor, will it intuitively make sense to somebody who doesn't have an investing skill set or a machine learning skill set? And when we get to that point as an ecosystem, that's the point when you're going to see Bittensor at 5,000, 10,000. I absolutely believe it's going to get there. I have no reason to believe it's not going to, over time, which is the key, over time, track the price trajectory of Bitcoin. Same tokenomics, infinitely greater use case as far as I'm concerned. You see people building businesses around Bitcoin. You don't see people building businesses on Bitcoin. And that's the fundamental difference between Bitcoin and Bittensor.
To recap, your investment fund is structured similar to a real estate fund in terms of you want to see monthly returns or yearly returns, and you do this with the staking. So you'll distribute these returns, I'm assuming, based off the amount of stake.
Yes.
And then the purpose of this fund is to bring non-crypto people into the ecosystem in the simplest way possible.
Yep.
How does this relate to, because you mentioned that people are building companies around Bitcoin, but not on Bitcoin. Bittensor, there's people building companies on Bittensor. How does your fund relate to Michael Saylor's company and what they're doing with debt issuance to buy Bitcoin? What's the differences or?
Yeah, let's. I'm glad you brought that up. Let's talk about Saylor for a second. On the one hand, I think what Michael Saylor is doing at MicroStrategy is absolutely genius. First of all, he's insane. Let's acknowledge that, and I mean that as a compliment. Very, very thin line between genius and insanity, and he was towing it, and now he's fully overboard, and I'm here for it. I love it. What Saylor's doing that I don't think people appreciate is he's created a vehicle. It's about vehicle creation. He's created a vehicle where fixed income investment funds now can create exposure to Bitcoin without violating their debt covenants, without violating the covenants of their funds. And that's incredibly important because, the fixed income market is $150 trillion. It's massive. It's massive compared to the equity market. It's huge. So what he's done is created a vehicle through which any fixed income fund who wants exposure to Bitcoin, as long as they can have convertible bond exposure, convert exposure, that they can now have exposure to Bitcoin. So I think that's genius. I think it's underappreciated. When he back in 2023 said, I'm resigning as CEO and I'm going to be chairman, and my in the press release he's like, my full-time job is going to be basically buying more Bitcoin. I think to the average person that's like, well, that's just silly. Like, what's so complicated about it? But what he's done is pretty genius, and he's brought billions and billions of dollars into the crypto space that otherwise would not be allocated towards the space, and I think we all need to appreciate that. What I don't necessarily agree with that he's done, I find the whole concept and notion of a Bitcoin yield just to be kind of silly. I think it's semantics. I understand, and I'm sure I'll get some MicroStrategy holders who, in response to this, are like, well, you don't understand, and it's, here's how it works. I get it. I understand the math, but the reality is, I get very nervous when people start inventing terms that don't need to be invented. For me, when somebody says this investment earns a yield, what that needs to mean is that there's a periodic cash payment. Otherwise, or in the case of crypto, there's a periodic crypto payment. The reality, the reason we structured our fund the way that we did, and we have monthly distributions where, staking yield on a monthly basis comes out of the pooled wallets control and moves into the control of the individual investors. The reason we do that is technically, from a tax perspective, this may change, but here and now from a tax perspective, as soon as crypto comes into your control, that's a taxable event, even if it's staking yield. So for all the investors in the fund that I manage, as soon as we're allocated staking yield, and of course we all know that that's on a continuous basis. I think the cleanest way to do it, is on a monthly basis. You distribute that to each of the fund owners, and then they can deal with it, as per their conversations with their own accountant. And some of them monetize it, some of them keep it and just keep the Bittensor. But to me, if you say something has a yield, it means that I have a cash payment, some type of monetizable periodic payment that's coming into my possession. You don't have that with MicroStrategy. And again, I understand that over time, the point of the convertible bonds is that you want to be a holder, and they're, everybody's throwing around this term accretive dilution, which is meant to be kind of contradictory, but it's like you're diluting the stock at the same time it's accretive because you're adding more Bitcoin, and you're adding Bitcoin at a faster pace for existing shareholders, that you're diluting them out of their holdings. But to me, all that is rubbish. If you want exposure to Bitcoin, you buy Bitcoin. So for the average investor, I'm not mad. I have good friends who bought MicroStrategy calls summer of 2023, and they're laughing their way to the bank right now, which is awesome. But I think at some point the trade probably becomes unsustainable. I think Saylor is relying on an eventuality that may or may not come to pass, which is that you'll receive an actual yield on your Bitcoin, meaning that you can, from Saylor's perspective, he can stash his Bitcoin holdings, with a bank, and then the bank will pay him a 5% yield based on those holdings, which then, if he needs to, he can monetize. I've been through enough cycles now to realize that can get messy very quickly. That meaning when you have expectations that aren't material yet, that can get messy very quickly. I was, just to pull my pants down a little bit in an appropriate way, 2021, I had almost all my crypto holdings on an exchange called Nexo. And most people probably don't know about Nexo, but Nexo's big deal is that, you could borrow against your holdings. And I see some Twitter guys now who are big on Bitcoin, Fred Krueger and others, talking about how great it is that you can borrow against your holdings. I got completely blown up. I didn't get blown up. I blew up because I borrowed against my holdings, and then I used the proceeds to buy more crypto. And then they had, they called it an oracle, but the reality is it was an algorithm where as soon as you hit a certain loan to value on the holdings of your portfolio, if you dip below a certain level, and that's obviously all dictated by the price of the currency that you own as collateral, if you dip below a certain loan to value ratio, then they automatically liquidate your holdings. So I went from having 7 figures to having nothing overnight because everything got auto sold, and it's all my fault because I levered up on my holdings. And I think that people who haven't been around this space long enough will learn that lesson. Unfortunately, that's a lesson that has to be learned firsthand. Every cycle, everybody says don't use leverage, and then of course everybody uses leverage. And that's ultimately what Michael Saylor is doing, is he's using leverage to buy Bitcoin. And I hope it goes well. I think let me be clear about this. I think it will go very well for the next, 12 to 18 months, because you have sovereigns, in the case of El Salvador, you have sovereigns who have adopted Bitcoin on their balance sheet. I think you will have more sovereigns following suit. Bukele right now is laughing to the bank. Max Kaiser is his crazy court jester, and they're doing very, very well. Other countries will follow suit. But eventually I do wonder if that trade kind of loses steam. When you get to the point where people start to question, okay, how am I going to get cash from this? And the reality in terms of what MicroStrategy is doing is the only way you get cash from that is by monetizing, is by selling your MicroStrategy shares. MicroStrategy is never going to send you a part, we're going to give you, half a Bitcoin for X number of shares. That's never going to happen. So I think that expectation, people who are buying now, I think should be cautious. And I'm not an investment advisor. That's not investment advice, but that's where I stand.
I guess I have two questions.
Yeah.
Can what Michael Saylor's doing with the debt convergence or conversion be done for Bittensor? And then two, how does the MicroStrategy trade blow up? Is there a scenario where that blows up?
I mean, the story that I've heard is the story of the Eggman, right? You have this guy who's saying, I want to buy a bunch of egg futures, and he starts out, and egg futures are trading at $5 a whatever a box, whatever they trade at. It's obviously fictitious, but he starts out buying at a certain price, and then the next day he comes in and the price is up 10%. Okay, I'm going to buy more. And this keeps happening for 3 months, and he's just buying more and more and more. And then one day he comes into his broker and he says, you know what, I'm worried that this rally is a little overdone. So I want to sell some of my futures. Can you find me somewhere I can sell? And then the broker just looks at him and he goes, there's nobody to sell to. You're the Eggman. Like, you're the only guy making the market. And I fear that that's kind of the situation that Saylor is walking himself into. Right now I think MicroStrategy, as of yesterday, trades at about 3 times the value of the Bitcoin they hold, which it should, right? Because it's, at least in theory, it's a proper business in addition to just being a Bitcoin treasury. But I think where it blows up is if for whatever reason you don't see the adoption that Saylor is counting on. Right now, what you're counting on essentially is one of two scenarios playing out, or in a perfect world, both scenarios playing out. You're counting on either Saylor being able to go to JP Morgan Chase or whatever his bank is, a year from now, and they say, hey, if you put Bitcoin on our balance sheet, if you have deposits with us in the form of digital currency, we will pay you an actual cash yield. I think that's one of two things that he's counting on. The second scenario is you have mass adoption by sovereign entities. And that could happen with Trump, President-elect Trump now, where you say, Cynthia Lummis passes a bill and leads legislation where, the U.S. now has a strategic Bitcoin reserve, and Saylor essentially front ran, not in a bad way, but in a admirable way, front ran, the U.S. government, who's now adding Bitcoin to its balance sheet. I think Microsoft is meeting very soon among their board, and I think that one of the conversations will be, should we have Bitcoin on a balance sheet? And I think if you get a couple large corporations to adopt Bitcoin as a treasury asset, that a lot of others will follow suit because they have to. It's kind of the dilemma that Saylor has now created for them and forced their hand, where they, if you don't have Bitcoin on your balance sheet as a major corporation a year from now, you're going to have to go to your investors and the analysts on the next earning call and explain why. And I think that up until the present, you've had a pretty plausible explanation. This is an experimental technology. This very volatile price action. This adoption that. you've kind of had an out. But if as soon as a corporation like Microsoft says, hey, we're going to hold some Bitcoin on a balance sheet, then you don't really have that out anymore, because now it's this one of the world's biggest tech companies has made the decision to do this, and they're typically a thought leader, they're a technology leader, they're a directional force in every industry. So how can you get out of following suit? I don't know if you can. So again, over the next 12 to 18 months, I think MicroStrategy will do very well. I don't own any options. I am a zero leverage guy because of the lesson that I learned firsthand in 2021. It's just not worth it to me. I got into Bittensor early enough that I don't need leverage. And I think the right way to multiply your holdings in the crypto space, and you get a lot of people who say I'm here for the tech, and I respect that greatly. There is no space without the people who say I'm in it for the tech. But the reality is, at the end of the day, we're all here to make money. And we do it through technology and development. In my case, I do it through investment and lending capital, so to speak, to organizations and people who deserve it so that they can build with that capital. The right way to multiply wealth in the crypto space is not by using leverage, in my opinion, but by going out further on the risk curve. So you say, okay, I like the intersection of crypto and AI, which is a very crude way to put it, but at a 40,000 foot level to someone who's not familiar with the space, Bittensor is the intersection. It's the Bitcoin of AI. So let's just go with that. You say I like that space. And now the question becomes, okay, I'm gonna have 90% of whatever investment dollars I have available allocated to this large cap that I know is going to crush it over the next 5 to 10 years. That's going to be my long-term stack, and I'm gonna delegate my stake, so I'm making 15% APY because there's no reason not to. You're going to have 90% of your funds allocated there, and then the other 10. You say, okay, let me go out, and this is discretionary. Only do it if you're comfortable potentially losing it. And maybe it's not 10 for an individual investor. Maybe it's 5, maybe it's 2, maybe it's 1, maybe it's 20. But you go out further on the risk curve, and you say, okay, now I'm gonna look for small caps in the AI crypto space that kind of share the overall ethos of what Bittensor is all about. So I want a project that's fueling open source development. I want a project where no VC involvement, no ICO, nobody's going in ratty through the back door. Everybody who owns has been forced to buy the same way in the market. I have projects like that. I'm not big on the meme coin mania just because it's not like morally I'm against meme coins. It's just that I've tried it, and every time I try it, I get run over, absolutely train wrecked. And I lose money, or I make some money, and then I convince myself that instead of 10x, I need to hold out for 100x, and then you just end up being exit liquidity. So I think that can be, chasing green candles in a market like this can be an absolute wealth destroyer. Levering up in a market like this can be an absolute wealth destroyer. What I think is productive is you find good projects with a low market cap, 10 million or under, and then you allocate a small percentage of your investment dollars towards those projects with the hope that those projects are going to rapidly expand, and then you'll be able to take the proceeds from that investment and roll it back into the blue chip, to your large cap, to your Bittensor, to your 90% investment. So the Roku network is one of those for me. I have several other kind of smaller investments in the AI crypto space, that intersection. I won't brag on them too much, but they've been grinding for 2 years. Their leadership has been approached by VCs. They've made zero effort to publicize what they're doing. I don't even think they have like an official full-length white paper, just because they've been building, and I respect that greatly. I've talked with their leadership. They're awesome. They're rock solid. They have relational connections with everybody who you should in this space, and I think it's a matter of time before the price starts to reflect that. But that, to me, that's that's how you multiply wealth in a market like this. Is you have 90% allocated to what you know it needs to be in long term, and then you take a smaller allocation. So some of these small caps in this space, if you allocate 10 grand, 20 grand, and I know that's not a small sum for most people, but if you allocate that kind of capital to a small project, you could be top 10 on the leaderboard in terms of ownership. And then these things, they 10x, they 100x overnight. As long as you're patient, you have a long-term investment horizon, you do very well over time. And then it's up to you. I'm gonna take some profit and put it into the blue chip, and then you end up being like Barry Silbert, 10 years from now, who bought 15,000 Bitcoin by plugging in 175 grand at 11 bucks, and now he's laughing all the way to the bank.
You touched on so many different great points there, from meme coins to leverage to adoption of Bitcoin by institutions and these large companies that are blue chip stocks. Bittensor being the blue chip of crypto and AI intersection,
Yeah.
being the Bitcoin of AI, so to speak. I want to drill down on the adoption of Bitcoin by these nation states and large blue chip companies. Do you think something like that can happen for Bittensor? And if it can, how does it happen? Does it happen with these large tech companies making subnets, or is it the government making a subnet? Is it even a subnet, or is it something else?
Yeah, I mean, short answer is I definitely think it can happen. I think to me, so there were, Vinod Khosla is a large investor in OpenAI, and he was. And I'm gonna meander a little bit. We'll get back to the main road, I promise. So Khosla was extremely vocal about his desire for Trump not to be elected president. He was extremely vocal in what seemed to me to be a very intellectually dishonest way about his desire for Kamala Harris to become the next president-elect. Multiple instances he claimed that, he was completely unbiased. As soon as anybody claims that they're unbiased, I know automatically that they're hiding something and that they're incredibly, incredibly biased. That's the way it works. Someone who's intelligent, who has integrity, who's honest, will admit everyone has a bias, and it's my job to notify myself and expose myself of my biases. So if you're telling me you're out there aggressively campaigning for Kamala Harris, and politics aside, like this is America, you get to vote for who you want to vote for. Everybody's advocating for their own self-interest as they're voting for the candidate they want to win. That's your bias. Who you're voting for is your bias. There's no objectively right candidate. And I'll probably piss some people off with that statement, but that's the reality. And if you don't think so, then guess what? You're biased. So he's out here aggressively advocating. If I wanted to be suspicious, which naturally I am, I look at a man like Vinod Khosla, I look at somebody like Sam Altman, and I say, let me connect some puzzle pieces here, and I'm just going to go out on a limb and assume that the reason you want Kamala Harris to win is because OpenAI, who you're either the leader in Sam Altman's case or you're the largest investor in Vinod Khosla's case, OpenAI has built over the Biden administration what they think is some form of regulatory monopoly in the AI space. And you see Sam Altman going to meetings in Washington with his smug look and kind of, assuming that he's got the space on lock and advising politicians and leaders and company CEOs on how to orchestrate their, AI regulation, AI policy. And then 4 months ago, Khosla starts coming out pretty aggressively advocating for basically a significant change in the regulatory framework in the AI space and prevention of access to open source AI. So what's obviously going on there, and maybe nobody will put it on paper, but I will, What's obviously going on there is here's OpenAI thinking they've achieved some sort of regulatory monopoly. They have a first mover advantage when it comes to Congress and Capitol Hill. And now that they have their advantage, they want to lock out everybody else from the space. And they want to make it so that no matter who you are, whether you're a government party, whether you're a corporation, whether you're Microsoft, you have to now come to OpenAI to utilize this new technology that, in my opinion, my conviction, should be open source from the gate. And, so the whole like, oh, I'm unbiased, I'm just advocating for the best candidate, that's hogwash, that's garbage. So back to the point is the way you see large scale adoption of open source AI is you see OpenAI blow up. You see OpenAI blow up. And I'm not wishing for that. I'm very grateful for the contributions they made to this space and for getting us to kind of the point where we are. But the reality is you should not, my hope is that we will not have gatekeepers for something as important as artificial intelligence. It has to be open source because there is no one person or group of people who can objectively lead humanity, and that's the reality that we're dealing with. And you get back to morals and ethics and how does my role as a prior role as a pastor influence all this. There is no one person or group of people who should control the trajectory of humanity, which ultimately, like it or not, I think will be dictated by what happens in the AI space. So the way that you have large-scale adoption of open source AI is that kind of first mover fails. And then the second movers realize that they don't need a closed source alternative, that the real way to go is to do what Facebook has done and just open source their models. And Facebook, I think Mark Zuckerberg, I don't really like the way he's dressing now, but I think his transformation has really been really astounding in the best way. He made a decision kind of internally, and OpenAI's admitted it, right? We've all seen the internal memo that said, there is no moat. Their employees know it. They know it. I think you've seen talent exodus from OpenAI because a lot of people, I can't read their minds, but I have to believe that a lot of people who started out at OpenAI, it was a very mission-driven thing for them. These are the best and the brightest. They can work anywhere they want. If they want to make money, they know it's not a hard thing for them to go and get a job where they make money, but they have purpose-driven objectives. They want to contribute towards a cause in which they believe. And open source AI was that cause. And then somebody just took it, and it is like, they just pulled the heart out of it. And Sam Altman, ultimately, from my vantage point as an outsider looking in, he took the hopes and dreams of all these people and essentially monetized them and said, you know what, we're going to be for profit, and I'm doing it for the good of the corporate. No, you're not. You're doing it because you like $7.5 billion in your pocket in terms of valuation. That's it, point blank, period. So the way that we see large scale adoption is two things. Number one, all that internal talent that is mission driven now starts building on the Bittensor network. And all you need is one person, the caliber, the quality of a Barry Silbert, to say, hey, we're going to give everything we've got to this, and you can trust this ecosystem. This is the place to build, and everybody's going to come. And I think as of yesterday, we have that. And obviously, it's been a longer process than one day. They've been building towards something, but as of right now, we have that. So price action is irrelevant to me. So because I know where this is headed. So that's one way is people leaving, but number two, corporations, the government, everybody in the world starts to realize, okay, I don't need a closed source solution. It's actually silly for me to commit myself to closed source because I can, I have a choice. I can either go closed source and have access to the progress of just one organization, one entity, or I can go to open source and I could have access to development fueled by the brightest minds in the world because you and I know this, the incentive mechanism behind the Bittensor network is genius. It's impossible to replicate. there will be copies. There have been copies. There will be more copies. But the reality is, Bittensor has first mover advantage. The Open Tensor Foundation, to Constant Shib's credit, have built things, and I don't know them personally, but I respect them greatly, have built things out in such a way that, they put morality first. And, I'm a Christian. My objective morality is shaped a certain way, but I greatly appreciate whether they're Christian or not, whether you're a Christian or not. I'm assuming from your cross that you are, but like as a listener, I greatly appreciate that objectively, regardless of who you are, where you come from, where you've been, what you've done, we can all agree on kind of these core tenets. That this, number one, is this incredibly important technology, arguably the most important technology that humanity has ever seen in the development of AI in general. Number two, it should not be gated. It should not be closed source. It has to be released. And again, you see people like Costa come out and say, well, if we release our best models, then China has access to them. China's already got better models than we do. You're not, and if they don't, guess what? They're going to steal them. They're going to build them. They're going to find people who are willing to share the IP. They're going to poach employees from these large corporations who can just, go and rebuild what they've already built. So just to pretend that we're going to have some advantage by trying to keep AI closed source it's a ridiculous notion to me. And that's why all of my investment dollars that I have available from now until further notice will go towards this cause. It's not just the biggest reason I'm here is I think there's tremendous opportunity for profit. Yeah, maybe that's about 50% of the reason why I'm here. But the other 50% is, hey, I really believe in this. And I have a pronounced disdain for anybody who thinks this level of technological advancement should be anything but open source. Because really what they're saying is, I'm the only person or I'm the only organization who's smart enough to dictate where this goes. And what, the translation as far as I'm concerned, the way I filter that is I'm the only, I'll save my expletives, but I'm the only jerk who's selfish enough to pretend that I'm doing things, that I'm keeping this closed source, pretending that I'm doing it for humanity when the real reason I'm doing it is because I want to be in control. Because I know that means more money comes to me, because ultimately I know that means more power comes to me. And that, regardless of your ethical persuasion, that is objectively evil. So there's my rant. You got your sermon. You can skip church on Sunday. There we go, man.
That's beautiful. That rant reminded me of something you had told me before. That was the Industrial Revolution's goal was to make human strength obsolete.
Yeah.
And the AI revolution is making human intelligence obsolete. This is a very dark kind of outlook. What does this mean for the future of society?
Yeah. This, we talked about this when you and I had kind of an intro call, and I think this is a good topic as any for a podcast because it's going to have major implications. The Industrial Revolution made human physical strength largely irrelevant, right? Because now you have machines that can physical productivity, really, because now you have machines that can replicate what a human was able to do, and we've only seen that accelerate over the decades since. At first you had simple machines, and now you have very complex machines. Some of what we do at my day job is we distribute and utilize 3D concrete printers, which are these massive 12,000 pound robots. We just installed a mobile robotic arm system that extrudes concrete at Virginia Tech. They're going to do a bunch of research with it. They're going to start a program where any contractor, developer in the state can come and utilize it, get training on it, and then kind of be sent out to build. So the point is you've seen this accelerating, exponential curve where there's been this massive acceleration of technology to the point where now human strength is largely irrelevant. You go you go on a job site, there's nobody on a construction site who's manually lifting, really, really anything anymore. Because if you're an employer and you don't have the means for them to lift it mechanically, you're probably going to get sued. But everybody's using telehandlers and excavators and cranes, and there's no requirement to be physically strong for you to be on a construction site or in a factory. I think most job listings now will say you need to be able to lift 50 pounds, and that's just kind of a safety mechanism for insurance policies. And now that's been a blue collar transition. Now imagine that as a white collar transition, where essentially 10, 15 years from now, maybe less, there could be no real. This is terrifying and liberating all at the same time, and I still don't know really what to do with it. But we're rapidly approaching a point where there will be no real intellectual requirement for you now to be in a white collar job. If you're getting a desk job, you are expected to know Microsoft Office. You should be gifted in Word, Excel, all of that. It's ubiquitous. If you apply for a desk job and you don't know how to use email, you're not going to get hired. And I think we're rapidly approaching a time where, human labor is not going to be irrelevant, because it can't be, because, I fully believe that, we have a level of creativity that's impossible to replicate, that ultimately from a spiritual perspective, right? You should be, from the Christian worldview, I speak from what I know. From the Christian worldview, if I believe that, my life should be led by the Holy Spirit, the Spirit of God, then I have something that's impossible to replace. Because there's no machine, that's just not how creation was designed. There's no machine that can replicate that skill set. If I'm a spirit-led person making spirit-led decisions, there's no machine. It doesn't matter how intelligent you are. I know lots of really smart people who do really dumb stuff, and I know lots of mouth breathers who do really smart stuff because they have good intuition, and that's what I don't think. And maybe I'm wrong, and maybe some machine learning expert's going to shout me down here, but I don't think that will ever be fully replicable by technology, or quite frankly that it should be. Right? If I'm certain things are impossible to replace. If I'm buying a piece of art, I'm not going to go out and get something. Just me personally, I'm not going to go out and buy something that is made by a machine. I'm going to buy something that's made by a human, because there's something in their heart that happened when they put that on canvas, or when they built it out of metal, or whatever the medium is. There's something that happened that is conveyed to me when I look at it. From an ethical perspective, I think this transition over the next 10 to 20 years will probably be one of the most important in humanity's history, for multiple reasons. I think Elon Musk is right, love him or hate him, in that we will have to have some form of UBI, universal basic income, because a lot of people during this transition are going to be made irrelevant. I mean, think about the crazy transition that's coming. You have, right now it's all living in the computer, meaning you have ChatGPT, you have, open source competitors to that, but you have this kind of co-pilot driven revolution that's happening, but you still need access to your smartphone and to the computer to get to access that network, so to speak. But over the next decade, I mean, Elon Musk is saying that he wants to make essentially droids of like, it's straight out of Star Wars or Star Trek. He wants to make droids available to people in your home for like $15,000 to $20,000. And of course, those droids are going to have auto uploads for the latest large language model. It's going to be wild. And so now you're going to start at the bottom. You're going to have whole labor classes that are going to be removed of their responsibility to participate in the labor force. And that's about the nicest that you can put it. The reality is you're going to have whole labor classes that are completely stripped of their ability to make a living. And it's going to start with, people who are doing housekeeping and lawn mowing and kind of repeatable tasks like that. But eventually it's going to get to the point where for people, who are investing, hopefully as, your podcast will still be in business because again, there's that heart connection. But for people who can be replaced by AI, that's the way that capitalism works. You will be replaced. So if you're listening to this and you have a simple job where you look at what you do and you say, hey, I think I could be replaced by AI in the next 10 to 15 years, your task then is not to, shake your fist at the sky and the evil AI overlords and say, let's fight this. How dare they, do what all the dock workers did on the East Coast about 45 days ago and say, oh, we're going to strike so that we're not replaced with automation. No, your task is actually to say, how do I get involved in this, and how do I become the best human at interacting with AI? How do I become the absolute best at using AI to kind of infiltrate my current industry, utilize the skill set that I already have to enhance AI's ability? What can I add to what AI can do that AI can never accomplish? And I think that's going to be the most important question over the next 10 to 20 years. I think the need for reskilling and upskilling will be more pronounced than ever. So again, if you're listening to this and you don't, I'm not technical, like get technical. You need to get technical. You need to go on Coursera. You need to get a master's degree in data science or, financial engineer, whatever you want, something that's going to teach you modeling, or quite frankly, just get on Kaggle. Again, open source, zero cost ways to build out your skill set. You take 2 hours a day, and instead of, sitting there with your mouth open on your couch, plugging Doritos, you go to Coursera and you actually learn something, or you get on Kaggle and you enter a competition. And, I have no idea what I'm doing, but now I'm going to learn. There are people on the internet who have just, they've gotten super good real life jobs by just doing open source skills training. If you're like a Kaggle grandmaster, that costed you time, energy, and effort. That didn't cost you any money out of pocket. But if an employer sees that, they know, I want to hire this person for a data science role. I want to hire this person for an analytics role, because they know that there's a skill set that comes with that probably can't even be replicated with a 2-year master's degree. So you have to reskill. What I think, so workforce reshaping, redevelopment will be a very important conversation over the next 10 to 20 years. So for people listening to this, you have to do everything you can to do 2 things. Number 1, become irreplaceable. Number 2, develop wealth. You don't want to be in a position 10 years from now where it's possible for your employer to click a button and spin up a replacement for your job. So that means that number 1, you become irreplaceable. Number 2, you generate wealth. You have enough income coming in on a monthly basis. So you're building your crypto holdings, and then you're eventually, in my opinion, mid-year to end of year 2025, after we see kind of the Trump effect kick in and everybody's off to the races, stock market, boom, 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 all-time highs every day for 6 months, sailors doing backflips into his pool. Like, when I start to see that, I'm going to start skimming off some profits, and I'm going to put it into real estate. I'm going to put it into real-world assets that, again, pay a yield. Not a Bitcoin yield, but an actual real-life cash yield. The bigger... So that's what I would do practically. The bigger issue that we're going to have to grapple with, and this is more of an existential question, is what does it mean for the human race when humans no longer have labor as their purpose, their reason for being? You can get away with, and that's really what you're doing, is getting away with it. So here's my perspective versus the reality. My perspective is that we're all made in the image of God, that every single person on this earth was put here for a reason to do something that nobody else can do quite like them. That is my belief. You and I, we've each been through stuff. Everybody listening to this, you've been through something. Nobody can replicate your life experience. That gives you a unique perspective that needs to be utilized for something while you're here on this earth. That needs to be utilized for some purpose that's that's greater than yourself, or some motive that's not inherently selfish. It's not just about you. If you believe that we are created beings and we're put here for a reason, and I believe that the evidence is overwhelming to support that, and you may disagree, and that's fine. But you can get away with here and now just kind of focusing and grinding on your job and assuming that that's your purpose. So, I know people who go out and every day they do manual repetitive tasks at their job. And this is what I'm here to do. I'm a ditch digger. That's what one of my high school English teachers used to say to us very, very enthusiastically. So you don't want to learn? The world always needs ditch diggers. He was a fun guy, as you can imagine. A student actually tried to hit him with a car once. Imagine that. So you can get away with now saying, well, I'm just a ditch digger. I just go out and I do this simple thing, and that's the reason why I'm here. Now imagine this. You remove the need of an entire economic class of people to be ditch diggers. And then again, it's not going to stay there. It's going to be ditch diggers up to, registered nurses, up to doctors and lawyers. Who knows what the world is going to look like, 100 years from now. Hopefully we won't blow it up or, melt from global warming before then. But at the end of the day, you now have 8 billion people who need to find purpose. Because their work, it's not that it's irrelevant, it's that it's replaceable. And what does that do to the human psyche when now 8 billion people wake up and realize, if I weren't here, my work would go on. And Elon Musk would send out a robot to do it. How does that mess with the human psyche? What does that do to mental health? I actually think that, I have a master's in mental health counseling, partially because I'm kind of preparing and prepositioning myself for this transition. But there's gonna be a very pronounced aggravated need for mental health professionals, because you're gonna have a lot of people now. Imagine you work 10 hours a day, Monday through Friday, and that's your purpose. And psychologically, spiritually, however you want to call it, whatever terminology you want to use, that's your reason for waking up in the morning, is this is my job, this is what I do. Now fast forward 10 years from now, that same person is sitting on the couch every day wondering if he or she should take their life because they have nothing to do. And they're getting a check from the government, not because they're poor, but because there's just no reason, human labor is more or less irrelevant. What do you do then? My best take is that I think you see a resurgence in human creativity. I think that frees us up. It's not, technological development is going to happen whether you like it or not. The question is, the question is not what is that going to prevent me from doing? It's what is it going to free me up to do? What liberty will I now have that I didn't have previously? And for a lot of people, that means, you used to have to work 10 hours a day. Now maybe you have to work 5, or in some cases, maybe you don't have to work at all. So what are you going to do with your free time? Are you going to volunteer at a charity? Like, we need to start thinking about this. What are you going to do with all that free time that you have now that you no longer have to earn a paycheck? And how are you going to benefit the world? In aggregate, I think it's going to be a great thing. I think it'll actually return us to kind of times past, in a way, where, everybody kind of has their simple responsibilities on a daily basis. And, everybody is very community driven, because they're no longer driven by their work. They're driven by community. They're driven by relationship. And I think there will be a resurgence of religion, and hopefully in a healthy way, of pursuing that greater purpose, which ultimately, that is not a scientific question. What is my purpose? That is a theological question. Ultimately, you can say it's psychological, but ultimately it's theological. It's who put you here and why are you here. So I think there will be a greater focus on those areas. I think here's a great book called Trekonomics that I highly recommend as a read. basically describes the economic system of the Star Trek series. A lot of times, people who design kind of sci-fi for us, series, movies, shows, they have that kind of, for whatever reason, they have that creative insight into what the future is actually going to look like. Again, not because of the people crafting the policies, but because they're the ones willing to take a step back and look at things creatively. And I think that that Star Trek has, and I'm not a Trekkie, by the way. I don't dress up and do like fake battles and stuff. But if that's your thing, cool. But I think they've given us a window in potentially what that economy could look like, where money is not really necessary anymore. And again, we may be approaching that point in the next 15 to 20 years, where money is not really necessary. Whether you have it or not is not really going to impact your quality of life anymore, because technology is so abundant. Which obviously kind of doubles back, and well, what's the point of investing in OpenTensor then, if in Bittensor, if money's going to be irrelevant? And the reality is it's a mission-driven investment. You're making sure that capital here and now is allocated to the right places, so that people who can be trusted, for lack of a better way to put it, have access to it, so they can build on open source systems.
Another beautiful sermon there. A lot of great things to think about.
I feel like I'm talking a lot, but I guess that's the point of all this, huh?
Yeah. For those people with replaceable jobs, you suggest being able to interact with AI better will give them more opportunities in the workplace to make money that they might not need in 15, 20 years because it will become
Right.
irrelevant.
Yep.
You also mentioned Elon Musk. He's working on Neuralink.
Yeah.
And within 15 to 20 years, you would have to assume that Neuralink would be able to have an AI that interfaces directly with your brain.
Right.
Is that something that you recommend, or what are your thoughts on that?
Personally, I know people who very adamantly say, as soon as it's available, I'm going to sign up for it. I'm not one of those people. Personally, I have no interest in allowing anything to be plugged into my brain, because again, it brings up the theological question: at what point do you stop being human and become machine? In theory, if I'm allowing someone through a microchip or whatever the vehicle is, if I'm allowing somebody to technological access to my brain, in theory, if it's possible, it's hackable. And I don't ever want there to be a connection where somebody else can influence my decisions. Right now that's happening, whether you're aware of it or not. That's happening through psychological warfare. That's happening through social media. That's happening, all these algorithms in social media. I'm assuming everybody knows this, but a lot of people don't. All these algorithms in social media, they're designed to show you stuff that's going to increase engagement. So for a lot of us, that means they're taking the stuff that pisses you off the most, and they're putting it in front of you first thing in the morning, last thing at night, everywhere in between, constantly throughout your day, so that you'll, hate, comment, and scroll and do all the things that you do on a daily basis. That is someone hacking into your brain. They're just doing it remotely. And so the thesis here with Neuralink, do I support its use for people who have irreversible, irreparable conditions that can be benefited from technology? Absolutely. If you have someone who's a quadriplegic and you say through the insertion of a Neuralink brain chip, they can walk again and function again and contribute again. You get back to that question of purpose, sitting around versus being able to contribute. I'm all for that. But for the average person, it's like, you know what? I think that'd be cool if I could just be like somebody from the Matrix, and I can just, plug a cord into my brain at the end of every day and just upload all the latest stuff. Like you don't need all the latest stuff, or else God, from my perspective, God who designed us would have given us that other stuff, right? Like if he wanted you to be plugged into a computer network, he would have put a USB-C port in the back of your head. You don't have one. There's a reason for that. So I won't be on that list of people who are lining up to get a brain implant, just because I never want to. Same thesis as why AI technology should be open source. I never want somebody else controlling the access that I have to my own neural network.
Controlling access and these gatekeepers, these overlords of control, these all tie into what dTAO is trying to solve, with validators being the ones that determine emissions for subnets and determine where capital is allocated to develop and
Yeah.
for value. What are
Yeah.
your thoughts on dTAO and how will that impact Bittensor?
Yeah. I think, listen, I think, I think anybody who has a complaint with dynamic tau, their complaint will be centered around its clunkiness. And what I mean by that is, how is it going to be rolled out? When is it going to be rolled out? I think the leaders of the Open Tensor Foundation have to be afforded an appropriate degree of flexibility to iterate. We as investors, as stakeholders, anybody who's a community participant is a stakeholder. As stakeholders in this network, we don't like unclear, potentially amorphous communication, because there's no way to immediately synthesize that and say, this is how this impacts my investment. If you, for me, tau is still a relatively murky future state, or dynamic tau rather, is still a relatively murky potential future state of the network. And it could take a variety of a number of shapes and sizes and forms. And at the end of the day, I think here and now the Open Tensor Foundation can be trusted to implement it responsibly. I have no reason to believe, from their leadership, from the way that they have delegated authority in the past, from the way that they have honored their intentions to keep everything open source, I have no reason to believe that they would not handle that transition in a manner that is self-interested. I have every reason to believe that they will handle it in a manner that is beneficial for kind of the average network participant, for future network participants. I think, to his credit, Barry Silbert is seeing, whether it's a lack of resource allocation, whether it's a lack of, just having someone who's kind of been through these growing pains before, as a real vocal participant in the community. I think he sees that, and that's a big part of the reason why he's stepping in, and I'm grateful for that. It's been interesting to watch, right? I've been involved as an investor since July of 2022. That was when I started buying through the online exchange. And I've seen a lot of people who were very vocal early participants who 6 months in, 12 months in, 18 months in, they start whining, they complain, I'm selling everything I got. They did it at $20, and now I can only imagine they're probably kicking themselves, wishing that they had given a little more flexibility and a little more grace to the people leading this charge, making these big decisions, trusting that it was going to work out in the end. So I'm willing to give them that flexibility. Whenever the final, I know that there have been there are assumptions as to what dTAO is going to look like. I haven't really tracked it closely for the past 6 months, because, quite frankly, when the final version is released, I'm all in, and I'll study it, like I studied math in high school. I'm going to be all about it. I'm going to learn it inside and out. But until then, it's kind of like I'm just not going to use my time, joining forums and being involved in Discord and Telegram and other places of discussion. Well, this is what it should look like. I trust the people who know what it should look like and are going to make it look the way it's supposed to. And maybe I should be more vocal. I don't know. But at the end of the day, what I see, to me, the Bittensor network becomes a venture capital marketplace focused around the development of open source AI, and that's incredibly exciting. You're removing market inefficiencies and creating, again, a vehicle, as we discussed earlier, as it relates to the fund that I manage, to Michael Saylor's ventures in MicroStrategy. You're creating a vehicle through which capital can be efficiently allocated. That's always a net benefit to the protocol. It's always a net benefit to society, as far as I'm concerned. You have lots of subnets who are building very, very advantageous, very advanced, very commendable use cases. I won't shout any of them out by name, but you know, you have lots of people who are building very consequential solutions to very serious problems on the network, and that's incredibly important. And the way that you encourage that is not by liking posts on Instagram. The way that you encourage that is by investing your capital into what they're doing. And I think Dynamic TAO provides a mechanism to do that. I know I'm being very optimistic. I know that I'm completely ignoring, intentionally ignoring kind of the underbelly that a lot of people have been complaining about over the past couple of days, which is, the cabal and miners versus validators, not this competition, but who should have a share of what as a result of what they contribute to the network. I get that. Again, people don't realize, they need to realize how early we are. Nobody, imagine if you were involved in Bitcoin in 2014. That's essentially the stage that we're at, maybe early 15. And you sit around and you're like, you know what? There's not enough vision here. There's too much uncertainty for me. So I'm just going to sell everything I hold. You are the Bitcoin pizza guy. You're throwing everything away because you thought it would be cute, and maybe you got some rush of dopamine because you got to tell everybody to go jam themselves. The reality is you have to embrace that uncertainty and say, just make a decision in your head. I'm going to be here for the next 5 years. And today's November 21st, 2024, and I'm going to be here till November 21st, 2029. And it's going to be messy, it's going to be ugly, it's going to be crazy. I'm going to have days, hopefully more often than not, when I wake up and I love it. I'm going to have days, hopefully fewer, that I wake up and I hate it. There's going to be beef, there's going to be drama, but all of that is irrelevant to me. I'm just not going to participate. And I'm going to be here 5 years from now. And I have to imagine that 5 years from now is going to look like, 2019, 2020 in Bitcoin. And it's like there's going to be, initial kind of surges and, oh, wow, everybody's looking at Bittensor now. And then it's still not going to be mainstream, maybe even 5 years from now. And then one day, somebody, whatever the next level up is from Barry Silbert, somebody's going to put eyes on it. It's going to be like, wow, this is really, really awesome. And I think because of the way technology works, it's going to happen sooner than the Bittensor trajectory is going to be, and it already has been, it's going to be more compacted than the Bitcoin price trajectory in a good way for investors, obviously. But, I think you make the decision to be here, and then you grind it out. You can be as active or as uninvolved in this network as you want to. If you want to be uninvolved, you stake, you collect your yield, and you chill. And you say, well, how am I going to stake in, if Dynamic TAO's around? So don't stake. You're still even without the 15% yield, the return that you have from just being an uninvolved, mouth-breathing owner of Bittensor is going to be exponentially larger than anywhere else you could ever put your money over the next 5 years, in my opinion. If you're chasing Bitcoin at these levels, do your thing. But to me, that ship has already sailed. If it's already institutionally adopted, it's no longer interesting to me because you lose that first mover advantage where the real money is made. And I think people are just getting upset for no reason. I think people are making this decision more complicated than it needs to be. You buy it, you hold it. If you want to stake it, you stake it. The one thing I don't like about Grayscale is they have this Bittensor trust, but I still don't know what happens to the yield. And we could talk about that maybe on a later podcast. But it bothers me. It bothers me that somebody's going to buy the Bittensor trust through Grayscale, and I think they're just hoping that people don't ask where the yield goes, which is crazy to me. I can't recommend that to people who ask. Anyway, yeah, I think you buy, you hold, you plug your nose. If you want to be more involved in the ecosystem, I think it would be ridiculous not to be. But if you don't, then you don't. You are, Grant, a perfect example of somebody who saw this thing and just made a decision. This is unlike anything I've ever seen, and it's probably worth throwing at least the working hours of my life at this. It probably is, and I probably won't regret it because I'm going to come out of this with an AI skill set that will be largely transferable. I'm going to come out of this with a capital market skill set that will be largely transferable. You know, this we are working right now at the intersection of two industries that are going to be two of the most important industries in the next decade, which are AI and economics. And it's a phenomenal place to be. Anybody who doesn't want to be here, you know, I question their sanity.
You expressed a lot of points that a lot of people building in Bittensor share, and that Bittensor is not perfect in its current form, but there is a belief it will be closer to perfect in the future, and that's where the bet is for people.
Yep.
You've been involved with Bittensor on pretty much every level. Investor, I think you've mined a little bit, you ran a validator for a little while. Are there any potential use cases for Bittensor subnets that you think could have significant impact? And are there any unexpected impacts or consequences of Bittensor that people don't consider moving forward into the future?
Yeah, man, you saved the tough questions for the end, huh? Sure. I think most of the largely beneficial use cases are already being acted upon, honestly. You know, what I'm really excited to see is kind of the integration of the Bittensor network with healthcare applications. That's already happening. You know, you can, healthcare is so much different now than it was 2 years ago. You know, if something's going on in your body, you can type your symptoms into ChatGPT or another platform. You know, it'll spit out a diagnosis, which then, you know, still go see a doctor, but you can then take that diagnosis to a doctor and be 99% sure of where they're going to land before you even see them, which is just incredible. The other large industry besides AI, so you have these kind of three major industries that have way too much gatekeeping as far as I'm concerned. The first one is the financial industry. We've already seen kind of that gate come down, at least on a small scale, with the adoption of cryptocurrency and digital currency over the past, you know, 10 years plus at this point. And again, that we're still early stages. Where I think Bittensor will be instrumental is the second industry, which is artificial intelligence. Kind of seeing the removal of that gate that blocks people from access. So I'm here for that, obviously. The third industry where there's still major gatekeeping is pharmaceutical. And you have, you know, Mark Cuban has done some work there. I think he went a little bit off the deep end with all his Kamala support until they told him to knock it off. But, you know, what he's done with Cost Plus is very admirable, right? You say you have all these people who need access to medication more cheaply, and there's a way to get them a generic version at a fraction of the price. So let's do that for the benefit of humanity. So that you know, you're taking profits from pharmaceutical companies, you're putting it back in the hands of people. Really, you're, you know, putting it back in the hands of insurance companies who are then, in a perfect world, are then not charging as large of a premium to the average consumer. But you get the point. You're redistributing that wealth in a way that is not, it's fueled by capital markets as opposed to government ordinance, which is always the way that it should happen. So I think it's important that wall comes down. But again, there's already subnets who are doing that. There's subnets. You know, what I would love to see is subnets that focus on the analysis and the integration, practical integration of historical healthcare research. So, you know, the problem in the healthcare industry is there are all these regulatory questions that arise, right? I briefly explored creating a subnet, you know, back when subnets were first starting. I briefly explored the idea, you know, I didn't even get into the mechanics, but the idea of creating a subnet where you could have, you know, mental health counseling application where, you know, essentially you're creating a co-pilot who would aid in diagnosis, and you have, you know, models that are trained on the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistics Manual, to to not only allocate a diagnosis, but then recommend a suggested treatment. And the wall that I quickly ran into is from a regulatory perspective. How do you create the right guardrails? But really, how do you avoid going to prison because you're giving somebody unlicensed medical advice? But again, there are people who are dealing with that already on the network, and I think the medical application will be incredibly important. You know, our current medical system is largely, you know, I have all the respect in the world for medical researchers, for doctors, but you know how much it can't hurt to have technology that's evaluating literally all of the available research throughout the course of human history that's ever contributed to a particular subject or diagnosis. You can access it in an instant now. And if you're a medical profession, you can use that information to help you make an informed diagnosis so that people don't have to suffer unnecessarily, so that people don't have to die unnecessarily. And I don't think that should be ignored. So that's an industry where I think there's going to be huge transformation. That's an industry where I think Bittensor is going to be foundational, right? The same thing that happens in other industries. If you make that technology open source, right? So I go to the doctor tomorrow and, you know, I have XYZ going, you know, I have a heart flutter, whatever the case may be. I don't know what's going on. I want to know what's going on. And then that doctor now has access to a database that allows them to more accurately pinpoint a diagnosis. You know, ideally they send me a brief interactive, you know, diagnostic form before I even head to the doctor that allows him to have a 99% idea of what's going on before I ever even show up for physical diagnosis. It helps me to manage my expectations. It helps him or her, the doctor, to help them allocate a diagnosis. It helps everybody involved in the process. And here's the fundamental difference that we've been talking about. If you as a practitioner have to pay OpenAI, you know, $2,000 a month, whatever it is, for access to that software, guess who ends up bearing that cost? I do, as the patient. But if I can now say, hey, I have access to this crazy software, by the way, it's totally free. It's built on Bittensor. The people who built it are compensated through the network dynamics, through the incentive mechanisms that already exist. And you as a patient will have no increased cost, either zero or nominal increased cost for you to use the software. And that's when transformation starts to happen, is when you have people who can utilize this technology at scale. And that's what I'm excited about, particularly in healthcare. So that's where it is being used. What was the other question where it shouldn't be used?
Just impacts or consequences of Bittensor that people don't consider.
Yeah, I don't know. You can get into the whole argument that, you know, again, which I think we've adequately refuted at this point, that people shouldn't have access to AI. Like it or not, they're going to have access to it. So I don't know that there are damaging use cases necessarily that I've seen or considered. I think there are stupid use cases. You know, if you're gonna, you know, use Bittensor to launch a new meme coin every 10 days and, you know, find a bunch of people as exit liquidity, that's probably not a particularly productive use. You know, I like the betting subnet. I like Bittensor. I think they do a good job. I think that's fun. You know, I don't think that's an example of a silly use case. But I'm sure there'll be some people who take to the stream. The problem is registration cost is such that you're going to weed out, and that's what a lot of people don't appreciate. You're going to weed out a lot of the stupid ideas because people can't afford the registration cost. And if they have the TAO to allocate towards registration, they're either wealthy, they've been around a while, or they have a backer. And if you remove all those things, you remove most of the dumb ideas. So I think it's actually a pretty effective screening mechanism. And I know people have their complaints and, well, I can't build because it's too, like, well, then have a good idea and approach somebody who has enough TAO. You know, it's easy to find them on the worldwide internet webs. You approach somebody who has enough TAO who will hear out your idea. You get an audience with them and convince them why your idea should have funding. I have people reach out to me all the time. I don't know how they find out about me, but because I'm not particularly public, but I have people who reach out to me all the time and like, hey, I have, XYZ use case and here's what I'm building on Bittensor and I want you to invest or I want your thoughts. And I'll give you 3 minutes of my time, 10 minutes of my time, 30 minutes of my time, depending on how well we know each other. And I'm happy to screen an idea and tell you whether or not it's dumb. And if it's not dumb, then I'll probably want to invest in it. If it is dumb, then you have the information that you need based on the capital that I'm willing to contribute. So I actually think the economic incentive is probably the best gatekeeper that we have to making sure that people don't use this network for silly reasons.
And if you do have a good idea, it is not hard to find that backer to fund it for
Yes.
the DAO. I can promise you that. And
Agreed.
we've been going for an hour and a half here. We
Yeah,
could probably
gotta
go
wrap
for
this
another
up,
hour
man.
and a half, but I'll wrap it up here with this. What advice do you have for non-crypto people when they are approaching Bittensor?
Yeah. What advice do I have in non-crypto? I would say be patient. It's just, this is one of those protocols where there's a lot happening. It's number one, like back in 2022, you had to be very familiar with Bitcoin in order to transact in Bittensor. You had to know a lot about, not a lot, but you had to be comfortable transacting in digital currency to actually even get involved. Now that barrier to entry is much lower. Shout out to Uphold. I think they made it very easy. Now that they're fully integrated with the Bittensor network, they made it very easy to buy, to hold, to transfer to your own wallet so you can stake, do all the things that we need to do. But anyway, my point is that we're at the intersection of digital currency. We're at the intersection of AI. Those are the two fields right now that are attracting all the best and brightest people in the world. So if you read the white paper, if you hang out in the Discord, Telegram, I don't even know if they have an official Telegram, but if you hang out in Discord, if you hang out on Twitter, X, and you don't get it, there's a good reason you don't get it, because literally all the best and brightest minds in the world are focusing on these two areas right now. In the intersection, you get even more, big brain people. So for me, it's hard to keep up with. And I wouldn't consider myself unintelligent, but I'm also not, I've got a pretty smooth brain compared to a lot of people. So be patient and also just buy some. That's not investment advice. I don't want to get you in trouble, but buy some, because you have to have skin in the game. That goes for any crypto project you're ever looking at. Just buy one. You can buy one DTAO token, and you're going to have, this morning $512 in it, and you're gonna now pay attention to it. You're gonna see it, show up in your wallet. You're gonna see it, follow OpenTensor and some of the major influencers, Bad English Tea, Dread Bongo. You want to follow some of these guys, not to remove your own decision making and just do what they do, because that would not be intelligent, but just to keep up to date with what's happening in the network. And then it's, like any new thing you embrace, I'm teaching my kids this, right? I got 4, they're ages 3 through 10 right now. And there's a feedback loop that you want to engage here, where the more you learn about something, the more proficient you become, the more you like it. And then the more you like it, the more you want to learn about it, the more proficient you become, the more you like it. And then you keep going around this feedback loop. So you apply that to any investment. You own a little bit, and then you're going to start learning about it. And then the more you learn, the more you like it, the more you buy. The more you learn, the more you like it, the more you buy. And it's just this feedback mechanism where you develop conviction over time. I think a lot of times, and here's the other thing I would say: don't worry about what other people are doing. Right now, what's very popular is meme coins, and protocols that have zero utility. And we're all reading about the guy who invested $17 in Peanut and then cashed out half at $7.5 million, and he's still riding half. This meme token that was created. Nobody gets upset about mass human death, but then somebody, for God's sake, they kill a squirrel in New York and everybody's all upset about it. Let's make a meme coin about it and see what can happen. Like, don't buy stuff like that. Do your own research. Don't chase green candles. Don't trust anybody else to make decisions for you. You are responsible for your decisions. If you lose money, that's your fault. That's nobody else's fault. Don't say, "Oh, I did it because somebody told me to." They didn't tell you to. You're their follower on X. There was no direct exchange there. They didn't tell you to do anything. You decided based on something they posted to do it. It's your decision. And also, you know, you only invest enough to get interested. But once you're interested, once you have that conviction, I personally believe there won't be another opportunity like this, maybe for another decade, maybe until, you know, I consider this to be probably the next best thing since Bitcoin. I know people have made that claim before, and guess what? Some of them have been wrong, but most of them are really wealthy. And I think this is going to turn out the same way.
Michael, it's been a pleasure having you on. Always good talking to you.
Likewise, my
Thank you.
friend.